Welcome to the Cyber Business Podcast, where we feature top founders and entrepreneurs and share their inspiring stories. Now, let's get started with the show.
Matthew Connor here, host of the Cyber Business Podcast. Today, we're joined by Malcolm Blow, CIO at Bowie State University and founder of Quantiuum. Malcolm, welcome to the show.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thanks for joining us. Before we get too far in, a quick word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by cyberlinks.com. That's cyber, Lynx.com. Do you know if a hacker's in your system? Most people and most companies don't until it's too late and the hacker's already done damage. A hacker's job is to bypass your security, so companies need a way of knowing when someone's gotten past theirs. That's where Cyberlinks comes in. We've partnered with the best cybersecurity companies in the world to be able to provide our clients with the best solutions at the best prices. So whether it's managed SIM, SOC, EDR, MDR, XDR, you name it, we'll help you find the best solution at the best price. Find out more at cyberlinks.com. That's cyber, Lynx.com. And now back to our show. Malcolm, for those who aren't familiar, can you tell us about Bowie State and your role there as CIO?
Yes. So, full disclaimer, I serve as Chief Information Security Officer, or CISO, at Bowie State University. I've been there running the cyber program for this is coming up on 3 years next month. And it's been a good time. I definitely love the mission there. And it's my job and my prerogative to keep the students, faculty, and the data safe along with the community as well.
I love it. And that's a really interesting challenge that I think a lot of people don't fully appreciate. When it comes to a university, your challenges, I think, are unique compared to most businesses where you've got full control over the office and the staff. Great. You've just got to secure them. But in a university, you've got the unique, challenge of securing the faculty and staff in that kind of traditional way, as well as kind of protecting the students who come in with all kinds of stuff onto the network doing their thing. And so balancing that between giving them access to the stuff they want and need, and yet not managing their devices. It's like the world's worst BYOD experience, right? It's like, really? So walk us through that. How do you go about that in your world, kind of balancing that?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to level set, that is pretty spot on with the randomness and the nuances of working in higher education. So a good example is, I believe the last survey I read, any student at a university who lives on campus has at least 5 different devices of their own. And just to put this in perspective, that's anything with the IP address. That's your smartwatch, that's your PlayStation or Xbox, your laptop, tablet, smartphone, smart TVs. So this is every student. So thousands of students, each one with those devices. And it's up to us. They're on our campus, they're on our network. And so it's up to us to protect those students even from themselves within reason, because of course, you don't want to limit them. Let's say there's a student in cybersecurity or IT operations, and they want to do research for homework about malware or hacking. You just can't outright block that because that would cause them a disruption. So there's a lot of nuances that go into it. In addition to that, a university is like a small city. There's a police department, there's a wellness center, so HIPAA data there. You have a research environment, which has all sorts of data, government data, CUI, things protected by any kind of agreement with the vendor or a research partner, and that two-way communication. So it's just a lot of nuances. And in my mind, I just like to treat them as some sort of a business unit with its own use case. So isolated use cases. So the student environment is isolated on its own and can't affect the business network or any of the business networks. And again, treat it as a one-on-one and do all your risk assessments and acknowledgements that way.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And I can't help but think, as AI starts getting, it's more and more, ubiquitous. Everybody's got it. The good guys, the bad guys, that you kind of have to fight fire with fire, right? It's no longer that that it's just AI to help you with your supercharging your Google searches or writing your email for you. I really love where things are going when it comes to AI and cybersecurity. I think that's fascinating. I'll give you my new favorite toy is Darktrace. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but super cool. They're using AI. For those who aren't familiar, they've been around for about 13 years, but they use AI for cybersecurity. And I'm getting to a question here for you. And I love it because it's exactly what you'd think. Instead of like bolting on an LLM onto some existing product, it's self-learning, machine learning from the get, and for like the last 13 years or so. And it's exactly what you'd think, right? You'd want AI looking at your email and saying, oh, you know what? This is clearly a fraud, right? This is a scam. Oh, it can catch those URLs that aren't flagged as bad yet because it's like, wait, this guy's saying he's the COO and this isn't right at all, right? And it can go through these things because it understands you as cool. So I love that about it. And I think this is the future of cybersecurity. It's fun, I think, that AI is going in a million different directions at a million miles an hour right now. And I think one of the winners that we're going to see out of this are companies like Darktrace who are using the right kind of AI in the right way, versus ChatGPT is the solution to everything. No, it's not. It's really cool and it does great stuff. It's a very specific tool for specific, things, but it opens up other issues, right? Prompt injection, you name it. So, my question to you is, with AI being where it is and you being where you are, where do you see AI playing a role in cybersecurity kind of for you and in the future if you just want to kind of stay futuristic or whatever?
Sure thing. I'd say in almost every facet of business, AI is at the moment, and it's just going to continue, but almost critical to have in the business. As a university, I still board a number of other businesses as well through consulting, but at the top level from the executive leadership team, they want to do more, better, and faster. And so when you're competing with anyone else with a computer and access to AI, there's free agents out there, there's highly affordable ones, people building their own all day, every day. So almost have to use artificial intelligence in some capacity for each business unit, including security, just to compete and keep up, not only with competition, but with the threats out there. You've mentioned Darktrace, there are a number of others, even SIM tools and all these other items out there. They build it in there, and uh, between people, processes, and technology is the easiest to modify to keep up with the scale.
Yes.
All the other items require a lot more time and budget, which working in the SLED space, state government, local government, and educational space where I'm at right now, uh, time and budget are both precious commodities that we just can't throw around. So focusing on technology, we can easily attain those scalability. Now, that said, one point of friction we have with that is the changing regulations. Um, Recently, this year and recent years, privacy has become a big thing as far as regulations from different states and countries, and AI is one as well. Different states are adopting AI policies, and when you use them for business context to include security, how you implement it becomes very granular.
Yes.
So, for example, here in in the state of Maryland and a lot of the areas I work for, there are a lot of nuances you have to consider when you're implementing AI, again, in the business use case, and when it is health and rights affecting. And so having to have a human in the loop is the best and sometimes only way to accomplish that, to meet those regulatory requirements. And so using AI in the right ways or at different gates is definitely where I spend most of my time when I try and add these artificial intelligence capabilities in.
I love it. I mean, I think it's really interesting because there's so much to consider when it comes to, implementing AI, right? Beyond, you've got the regulatory, absolutely, and you can be compliant, but not safe. And you can be safe and not compliant. So, the two not mutually exclusive, right? So I think that's a really, it puts us at a really interesting place and time where, as kind of cybersecurity professionals, where we've got this great new technology at our hands. You don't want to be behind the power curve. You don't want to get left behind. As other people implement AI, they get a competitive advantage. But you do have to weigh that with the security concerns and what data is it getting? How is it being controlled? How easy is something like a prompt injection, for an ad, some bad actor to kind of, let's say, use your chat bot against you, and suddenly they've weaponized it, or they've gotten access to things that they shouldn't have because they were able to outsmart the chat bot. So how do you balance that, when you're going and kind of making these decisions or evaluating products?
So that is a very good question. Thank you for asking.
Cool.
There are a lot of different ways. I'm gonna just jump out of the security context just to make it more palatable, and
Yeah.
that is in the world of education. A huge component of the business is admissions. We want to get as many students in as we can support, and the best students in are the students who would benefit the most from our education. And so, as we use AI just for the admissions department, with the regulations out there, and that's the best practice, a human needs to be involved in that. Any kind of AI cannot just um, make a decision, go through a full process. And so, for example, when it comes to the admissions process, AI could make recommendations or help with reformatting or doing things of that for processing and bulk assessments, but it can't say pick this student over this one or just make pure recommendations without a human laying eyes on that. And that's just one aspect of it. And then outside of that, here in the local area, in the Maryland area, there was a school that had AI weapons detection as part of their surveillance system, which I fully believe in and support. However, it mischaracterized a student and it mistook a bag of chips for a weapon. And so a student just living their everyday life and doing what they should be doing was suddenly confronted by numerous police officers who thought they were responding to a valid case. Now, that said, it is very possible that a human could have made that same mistake. But with the regulations, it's far worse for a pure machine to make that same mistake than for a human. Same thing in security. If a human, I used to spend time at the federal level doing incident response and threat hunting and pen testing, and for over a decade. And so, in that, of course, humans make mistakes. But if you're using pure AI and the same mistakes are made again in the SOC context, then it's going to be looked at a lot more scrutiny from regulators. So
Yeah.
that's just the main thing I'm concerned about is again, some mistakes are normal, historically speaking, but as you use pure machines to do that, it's a much more grave offense for a machine to make those same mistakes.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I think, in that particular case, the fact that the chip bag looked just like a gun was, no, I'm just kidding. I mean, what is it, gun chips? That's crazy. No, but I think it's a really interesting example, where and I think it's so obvious to people that, AI isn't flawless, and it really does require, human supervision all the time. So going back to your admissions thing, I mean, especially now, it was different, 20, 30, 40 years ago, applying to college, you applied, you kind of got in. It wasn't the same thing. Now, with the Common Apps, kids are applying to dozens, if not hundreds of universities. And so now the university, which is all well and good, except for the fact that look at what it does to the admissions office now when they're getting flooded with applications. Come on, it's not humanly possible to read every application. You have to allocate so many resources. So there is that balance of how do we, properly use AI in this case to help us find the right fit, applicants, get those students who really want to come here, get them, accepted. So that's a really challenging one. And I don't know. I mean, I think it's great that AI can help with that. And I don't know if we ever get to the day where AI is doing all of the everything for, I don't know. I mean, maybe someday in the future, but right now we live in a world where it has to be supervised pretty heavily. And so I think that shapes where people can go with the technology. Because every time we've seen somebody just let the technology go, you've got lawyers who've submitted cases that don't exist. They're like they cite cases that didn't exist. You get kids pulled over for their bag of chips, right? You get all kinds of issues. Um, because we're so easily fooled by it. So I think that's part of the human challenge is kind of balancing that. So how do you do that? Do you put in kind of safeguards? Do you just kind of try to educate? Is it part of the allocation, the process when you're assessing things to say, hey, look, this is a really cool tool, but we have to use it wisely. How do you guys go about that?
So, as a CISO and even as a CIO or CTO, as you implement technology, one of our primary duties and responsibilities is to highlight the risk of doing it. And so that's where my focus is as I look at how much AI we can bring in, because I am pro AI and working as much as possible to enable the business. But the risks are things that are usually not a technology issue. A good example is, let's say you start recording meetings. Transcriptions are game changer. I love them. I don't think I can live without them anymore. However, if you're transcribing a meeting and you have those records, you have to keep in mind that a risk with that is that transcript is potentially and likely going to be discoverable if there's a legal case in the future. It's going to be as a public institution that's going to be covered by whatever the local Freedom of Information Act is. And so you have to keep that in mind and do that in your training. Not that you want to hide things, but certain things that weren't designed to be for public consumption, is a
Right?
candid conversation about how to do things that could be misconstrued out of context. You want to figure out that using AI and doing transcriptions, which is one of the most common use cases, does bring in that risk. So that's more so where my line of thinking is. It's very rare that there's a pure technology issue with AI that's going to make me say no to something. It's usually a lack of process or lack of training that present a greater risk for that. And then another issue I wanted to bring up is just let's talk cybersecurity. In my field, we use acronyms a lot, or we just say things and don't think of how it could be construed. So, an example that I came across a few months ago was I was going through the transcription later, and I was referring to NIST 853, and then the transcription marked it as 853 instead of 800-53. And so, common things like that could cause a business issue later, is if you're let's say you're in the private sector and you're doing a proposition and you have all those mistakes throughout a proposal or RFP. I've actually worked with vendors before where they presented me something that I could tell was done by AI because they had custom diagrams, but the languages were mixed up on the same page and the same image. And so there's a few telltale signs. And so it goes into training, education, and awareness, where I think the focus is as you implement AI to enable a business.
Well, you know what? Let's talk about Quantium because you kind of mentioned it there. Can you what can you tell us about it? Kind of how did you start it and where are you now with it?
Oh, sure thing. So I mentioned before, I spent over a decade in the federal service, everywhere from the intelligence community to some of the scientific agencies like NASA and NOAA, and then most of that was spent in the Department of Defense, now called the Department of War, but doing cyber operations and mission planning um, for those agencies. And so, as a part of that, one of the main things that uh, inspired me to do consulting in my ample nights and weekend hours was because I'd lead missions and defensive cyber operations and present an issue, or even as a pen tester with the Department of Defense. Proved there's an issue because you could hack it through a red teaming engagement and do the report or resolve an incident on the IR side or blue team and present a report to leadership when I work with other DoD agencies, CIOs and CISOs, and then years later or even for the next engagement with those same stakeholders, find out it wasn't addressed. And so just um, over time of doing that, I was just inspired to start consulting where I could more directly influence stakeholders and executive leadership teams to um, address risk properly. Now, I definitely believe that there are nuances. There are times when risk have to be accepted for the sake of the business or organization. But I feel like I could contribute more by inspiring more directly to the board stakeholders and making them aware by translating those risks, the technical risks, to more of a chief officer level of here's the issue. This is the likelihood of it happening. This is how much it will cost if it happens, and here's the cost to fix it. And so that level of thinking is really where I get the most traction and what inspired me to start Quantium.
I
And so
love
through
it.
Quantium, I've worked with different types of organizations, slate organizations, startups, and SMBs. And once I got off the ground, then I left the federal world to do executive consulting work or executive work full time, and it's been a blessing ever since.
That's fantastic. So, with your extensive government background, does that kind of lean you more towards the the CMMC side of things whenever it comes to to the CISO role? Is that something that you're interested in and doing consulting with, or do you try to steer clear of that?
It's in the middle. It has nothing to do with my experience in the government. I just CMMC is based on NIST 800-171, and that is my favorite of the networks. I think it's a perfect balance between being prescriptive and descriptive, and that's why I like to use that. But wherever I'm at, I'll use what's best for that organization as the basis for developing the GRC platform. And from there, my usual plan is just to crosswalk out. So at the university level, whatever we type to internally, we have to crosswalk out to HIPAA, FERPA, GOBA, all the privacy regulations, but just having a core platform or a core regulation. Again, my favorite is NIST 171, and then crosswalking out to whatever other framework we need. And as we do that, again, just focusing on that one platform we have at the middle allows us to do what I call provable compliance. That way, it's one set of artifacts and evidence that we collect as part of our regular operations. And when it's time for an audit, just give them access to our GRC platform. And because of the crosswalks, all those controls are typically met with very little issues.
Well, I can't help but think, you're just hearing that and kind of our conversation so far, the, this CISO role has changed so much in the lately, right? Let alone in the last 5 years, 10 years. So, I mean, and it's not like it's a 40-year-old, role, right? So I think it's a modern role to begin with, but uh, the evolving CISO role, I'd like to talk, to kind of dive into this a little bit because I think it's changing, rapidly as with the times as it should, but I'd like to get your take on it.
Sure, I definitely agree. Even since I worked my way up the chain, I could see the CISO role changing, and I would say for the better. Right now, in my opinion, the focus is definitely focusing more on being an enabler of the business and being a full and normal member of the C-suite or executive leadership team. And so that's been the biggest change historically. Cybersecurity overall was seen as a team of no, and the CISO or the top cyber person was whatever analyst or security engineer worked the hardest, and they were pretty much promoted to the point where uh, they were at their capacity because they're used to technology and make it the most secure. And that's why it caused so many issues and so much friction with other business units. Versus now, the CISO is typically focused more on risk, GRC, and focus on how it can be a point of business. So, for example, for some consulting engagements, I've helped organizations find the best regulation or audit framework they can do that would drive more business and speed up the sales process. And so that's more where the focus is, or focus on make this decision like which platform to use for everything from a productivity suite to the CI/CD pipeline, or Google Cloud Platform versus Azure versus Oracle versus AWS. But all those come into mind. The CISO role is becoming more intermingled in a good way, more of a partner with the CIO or CTO. I've worn all those hats before, and the CISO role is actually in some places, some Fortune 500, even 100 companies. Now the CIO would report to the CISO, because with the CIA triad, you have confidentiality, you have integrity, and availability. The CIO is more focused on the availability piece of that, and the CISO still has all these other points to focus on. A very recent example is this year, Microsoft broke out their CISO focus. So now their global CISO has, I think, about a dozen deputy CISOs under him amongst the different horizontals and verticals, because again, chief information security officers are now responsible for GRC, privacy, AI security, business continuity, disaster recovery, traditional SOC platforms, threat intelligence, and so it's just not practical to be a mile wide and a mile deep. And so having to break those down has been the biggest difference. And with that CISO, the top level CISO focusing on translating all those to the different business leaders, making sure they're addressing things properly, making sure their clients are safe, making sure the business is running as fast and secure as possible. And then just again, focusing with those other C-level executives on they have the knowledge to make informed decisions. Another thing I see different over time is now CISOs are more organized. Historically, they had no authority, but all the responsibility. And now they're actually able to they're actually able to change that up and properly put the responsibility with whoever has that authority, and making sure that those decisions are made with the knowledge behind it. So whether it's AI, whether it's changing platforms, whether it's which risk or vulnerability to push off to the next sprint cycle or the next funding cycle, whoever makes that decision is the stakeholder responsible if it goes to worse. Because again, every risk has a impact and a likelihood, but making sure those are all accurate. Because if worse does happen, which every company will likely at one point, if not already, been hacked or breached, but to make sure it's addressed properly, reasonably, and you're able to do the reporting and investigations in time.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's really interesting, and and I couldn't agree more. And one of the things that it strikes me as you say that is that really cybersecurity, has gone from being I think you said it, those that, just saying no, right? The just say no people, to now being, a partner of the CIO and a partner of the executive team, and on helping to get things done. So I think part of that, that transformation has been really good. But, you know, I think there's a huge shift towards, kind of strategic business enablement now, from cybersecurity, whereas before it was always playing defense. It was more of a cost center and it wasn't seen as kind of a force multiplier that I think it is today. So I'd like to get your take on that, and your view.
So I also agree with that. It's definitely one of the first things I focus on at an organization is, one, making sure I do proper due diligence, find all the skeletons in the closet, get them roadmapped, and then making sure the executive leadership team has a risk tolerance that's documented, and giving my team, the security organization, authority to do whatever it needs to make sure we're operating within that risk tolerance. Anything outside of that would be an exception or a conversation with those stakeholders. But as you mentioned, it is definitely focused more so on enabling the business, how they can do things better, faster, and competing with whoever the competition is. We do like a SWOT chart and figure out how technology can enable that or make it better. And so one of the things I like to do, because again, I'm fighting decades of a bad taste in different business units' mouths when it comes to security. And so to change that, one of the things I like to focus on is how security can um, be sought after. So I've been with my current organization, Bowie State University, for about 3 years, and now it's getting to the point, because it took 2 years to get there, where people are willing and want to come to security as early as possible, because they know one of the first things I tell my team is when we get a request in, never say no. The response is always, this is what it will take to get this done. Because we want to make it happen. It's our job to show them what it would take, and anything is possible, but it has to be done through whatever the right mitigating or compensating controls are.
I think that is that little bit of, don't say no, just let them know what it's going to take to make it happen. I think that's such a huge shift. Little, but ends up being huge, right? Because at the end of the day, if you're just the no guys, then great. It is demoralizing. It's frustrating. It's unhelpful. And I think the great, this is what it's going to take to get there, to make this happen, is is so much better. I mean, that's just such a great way of presenting it versus nah, or I don't know, we'll look into it. We'll get back to you. Okay, great. Thanks. So no, I think that's just really well said. Malcolm, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show today. But before we go, can you tell everybody where they can find out more about you and more about Quantium?
Sure thing. The easiest way to reach out to me is on LinkedIn. Please reach out. My only request is, if you do that, send me a message that says, why you're reaching out, what you're looking for. But I'm happy to connect with anyone, and looking forward to the one, continuing to listen to the podcast, and two, seeing how the industry continues to change for the better.
I love it. All right, Malcolm, until next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Cyber Business Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.